The morning after Tyler told his colleagues I was just a home cook, nothing special, I made myself a cup of coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened my old recipe notebook to the very first page. The handwriting was mine, younger, neater, a little nervous. March 14th, 1978. Hotel Aurelius, Columbus. First day as a line cook. I had written the date the way you write the first line of a diary you intend to keep forever. 43 years later, two of Tyler's chef friends had just finished the last of my beef short rib braise and were scraping their plates in silence. Not embarrassed silence, the other kind. The kind that means the food made them forget to talk. My grandson was staring at his own plate with an expression I recognized. He had called my cooking disgusting 4 hours earlier. He was now calculating his losses. I put the notebook back on the shelf and poured myself a second cup. The coffee was good. I grew the herbs myself. I always have. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's what happens when you get to be 71. You know how the story ends before you finish telling it, and you have to discipline yourself to go back to the beginning, back to when none of it had happened yet, and the kitchen still smelled only of garlic and rosemary and the particular peace of a Sunday afternoon with nowhere to be. I am Eleanor Marsh. Most people who have known me long enough call me Ellie. I live in the house my husband Gerald and I bought in 1989 in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio that used to be the edge of the world and is now surrounded by chain restaurants and a Whole Foods. Gerald died 6 years ago. Heart attack. Quick. The way he would have wanted it, hating the idea of slowness in anything. I have his tools in the garage, his book collection in the spare room, and his chair in the kitchen where I sit in the evenings. The house is mine now, in a way it couldn't be when he was alive. Not because I didn't love him, but because a house is different when you are alone in it. Every corner belongs to you differently. The kitchen is the heart of it. It is not a showy kitchen, no stainless steel, no marble, no open shelving displaying copper pots like jewelry. It is a working kitchen. The counters are scarred in places from 30 years of serious use. The knife block holds 8 knives I have sharpened myself for over 2 decades, including a boning knife I bought in 1983 that has more memory in its handle than most cookbooks have in their pages. The pots are heavy and well seasoned. The herb garden outside the window is organized the way a professional kitchen is organized, by frequency of use, by harmony of flavor, by what grows best next to what. Gerald used to say my kitchen looked purposeful. He meant it as the highest compliment. I worked for 30 years as a professional cook. Not a celebrity chef, not the kind with a television show and a line of branded olive oil. The other kind. The kind that shows up at 5 in the morning and doesn't leave until midnight. The kind that runs a section with the precision of a military operation. The kind that other cooks respect because they have watched your hands. I was a sous chef at Hotel Aurelius for 11 years. Before that, I worked at 2 restaurants in Columbus and 1 summer in a kitchen in Tuscany that changed the way I thought about acid and fat forever. I left hotel work in 2008 to care for my mother, who was sick. And after she died and Gerald's health began its long, slow conversation with the end of things, I never went back. That is the shape of a woman's career. You do not always get to finish the sentence you were in the middle of. I want to be clear about one thing. I do not tell people what I used to do. It is not modesty exactly. It is more that I learned long ago that the kitchen either speaks for itself or it doesn't, and no amount of credentials makes food taste better. My neighbors know me as the woman with the good garden. My friends know me as the one who brings the dish everyone asks about. Tyler, my daughter Diane's son, has been eating my food his entire life without, apparently, understanding what it was. Tyler is 26. He graduated from the Ohio Culinary Institute, eventually, after a difficult first year that involved dropping out and going back. I am not saying this unkindly. Going back takes a particular kind of courage that getting it right the first time does not require. He works now as a line cook at Osteria Selene, a very good Italian restaurant in the Short North neighborhood, run by a chef named Marco De Vita, who has a reputation that my old colleagues speak of with genuine respect. Tyler got the job partly on the strength of a recommendation letter I wrote for him at his request. I wrote it honestly. I described what I had seen in him in the kitchen, the instinct for seasoning, the speed he developed, the seriousness he brought to preparation on the days he brought it. I wrote 3 paragraphs. He got the job. That was 8 months ago. In the months that followed, Tyler changed in a way I noticed but did not name until later. He started using the word professional the way some people use a citation, as a device to end a conversation rather than advance it. He started talking about real chefs in contrast to something else, some lesser category he did not always name directly but gestured toward. He would come to Sunday dinners and comment on my herbs. "It's fine," he'd say, "a little rustic." Or on my knife technique, which he called old-fashioned. The comments were small enough that I could have dismissed them, and mostly I did. I have watched enough young cooks come through a kitchen to understand the particular arrogance of the newly trained. It passes, usually, or it doesn't, and the cook either burns out or calcifies into someone nobody wants to work next to. I was patient. In November, 3 months before the Sunday I am building toward, Tyler came for Thanksgiving. My house, my table, 12 people, including Diane and her husband Frank, 2 of my neighbors, and Tyler with a date, a pleasant young woman named Cassidy, who complimented everything she ate with the slightly desperate enthusiasm of someone trying very hard to be liked. After dinner, when most people had moved to the living room, I overheard Tyler in the kitchen talking to Cassidy in a low voice. He didn't know I was in the pantry. "My grandmother is sweet," he said, "but she's basically just a home cook. She doesn't really know what she's doing technically. It's more like comfort food, you know? Like, it tastes fine, but it's not serious." Cassidy made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been the sound of someone who has learned not to disagree with the person they are with. I stood very still between the canned tomatoes and the pasta shelf and let the words arrange themselves into their correct meaning. Then I went back to the dining room and had a piece of pie. I did not say anything to Tyler that night. I did not say anything to Diane. I put it on a shelf in my mind the way you put something away when you don't know yet what to do with it, and I left it there. The winter passed. My soup club met every other week. Viv from across the street, and Nora, who lives about 15 minutes away near Bexley, and Rosa, who is 20 minutes the other direction, but always early. We had been calling it the soup club since the previous winter, when Viv had declared that wine clubs were pretentious and book clubs required reading, and she wanted something that combined socializing with eating without requiring her to have opinions about literature. The soup club was simple. We rotated houses, each host chose a classical soup and an experimental one, and we spent 3 hours cooking, tasting, arguing, and saying things we would not say in more formal company. Viv's kitchen was the messiest. Nora's was the most organized. Rosa's was the loudest, because Rosa was the loudest. Mine was, I think, the most comfortable, though I may be biased. In January, we met at Nora's. She made a Hungarian goulash, traditional as a tribute to her grandmother, and a lemongrass coconut number that she was workshopping, and that divided the table along philosophical lines. Viv declared it interesting in the tone she uses for things she finds baffling. Rosa loved it. I was somewhere in between. We ate around Nora's kitchen table, which is covered with a tablecloth that her mother embroidered in the 1960s and which has survived 40 years and 4 apartment moves and smells faintly of paprika no matter what is cooked on top of it. "So Tyler's coming this Sunday," I said, at the point in the evening when the soup had been eaten and we had moved on to wine and the specific honesty that wine at this stage of a friendship enables. "With the attitude?" Viv asked. She set down her glass and looked at me with the direct, steady attention she used to give patients when she was taking a history and needed the unfiltered version. "With the attitude," I confirmed. "And he's bringing people from the restaurant." Nora said it as a statement. She had been told the story already. I'd called her in the week, and had been quietly furious about it ever since, in the quiet, precise way that Nora is furious about things, like a thermostat that maintains its temperature without visible effort. "Marco DeVita and a young woman named Amanda Park," I said. "He wants to show off, I think. He wants them to see—" I paused. "I'm not entirely sure what he wants them to see." "He wants them to see a sweet old lady who makes mediocre food," Viv said, "so that he looks sophisticated by contrast. It's a classic move. I've seen it in medicine. The young doctor brings the senior doctor to meet the patient, makes the patient seem less coherent than she is, so that when the senior doctor looks to the young one for context, the young one gets to define the situation." She picked up her wine. "It's contemptible when doctors do it. What are you making?" "Beef short rib braise," I said. "Polenta, the herb salad, and a tarte tatin." "That's not mediocre food," Rosa said with some force. "I have eaten that meal 3 times in my life, and I have thought about it on days I was eating other things. That braise." She touched her fingers to her lips in a gesture that was genuine. "He won't know that until he eats it," I said. "And by then, I want to already have had a conversation with his colleagues about who I am." The table was quiet for a moment. "You're going to tell them," Nora said. "I'm going to let them ask," I said. "There's a difference." Viv refilled her glass. "And if they don't ask?" "Then the food will do the talking," I considered. "But I think they'll ask. Marco DeVita has a palate. He won't be able to help himself." There was another silence, the comfortable kind that means people are thinking something through rather than having nothing to say. "What if Tyler tries to undercut you in the moment?" Rosa asked. "You know he'll say something. He always does." "I know," I said. "Are you going to say anything back?" I looked at my wine glass. Outside Nora's kitchen window, the January night was dark and still and very cold. "Probably not very much," I said. "I find that I don't need to." Rosa made a sound of profound appreciation. "Dios mío," she said quietly, which was the closest she came to prayer when she was impressed. Viv raised her glass. "To the braise," she said. "To the braise," we said, and drank. I drove home that night along streets that were empty and very clean from the cold, the kind of cold that makes sound carry differently, crisply, like words said with precision. I was not angry. I want to be accurate about this, because the temptation in telling a story is to make the emotional architecture simpler than it was. I was not a woman in a fury. I was a woman who had been told, by the person she had helped the most, that she was nothing in particular, and who had decided, with some care, what to do about that. There is a version of that feeling that is grief. There is a version that is humiliation. What I was experiencing was something more considered. I had 30 years in professional kitchens, and I knew exactly what I had. Tyler's opinion of my cooking was the least of my concerns. The question was whether the people whose opinion might actually matter to him would share it. I thought they would not. On Thursday, 2 days before the Sunday dinner, something happened that I had not planned for and that changed the shape of what came next in a way that I would later describe as fortunate. I received a call from Diane. Diane is my daughter. She is 48 years old and works in healthcare administration and has spent most of her adult life finding the path of least resistance in any given situation. Not from laziness, but from a genuine terror of conflict that has always made me a little sad. Gerald used to say Diane was made of water. She took the shape of whatever container she was in. He said it with tenderness. I took his point without the tenderness. She called on Thursday evening while I was in the kitchen trimming the short ribs, which I do myself because I like to feel the meat and know what I'm working with. "Mom," she said. The way she said it, leading with the word, letting it sit there, meant she had something she was working up to. "Diane," I said. I set down the knife. "Tyler mentioned that he's bringing people from work on Sunday." "He did," I said. "Marco DeVita and Amanda Park. I looked them up. They seem accomplished." A pause. "Mom, I know Tyler has been a little..." She trailed off. "A little what?" "He's young," she said. "He's trying to establish himself. You know how it is when you're young and you're in a new environment and you're trying to..." "Diane," I said, "what are you trying to tell me?" Another pause, longer. Outside, the neighbor's dog was barking at something. "I heard him talking to someone on the phone," she said, "last week. He was telling them about dinner on Sunday and he said..." She stopped. "What did he say?" "He said it would be funny, that you'd serve something homey and simple, and they'd all be polite, and then they'd go out for real food after." The last 4 words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them and needed them gone. I stood very still. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, the dog stopped barking. "Mom?" Diane said. "I heard you," I said. "I'm sorry. I know I should have told you sooner. I just didn't want to start something." I looked at the short ribs on the cutting board. Good meat, well marbled. It had been in a wine brine since Tuesday. "You're telling me now," I said. "Are you angry?" "No," I said, which was true, though not in the way she was hoping. "Mom, he's young and he's trying to be impressive and he doesn't mean it the way it sounds. He's been under a lot of pressure at work and Tyler has always been... He acts out when he's insecure. You know that. You've always known that." "Diane," I said it quietly, and she stopped. A breath. "When he was saying these things, not just this time, the past several months, did you say anything to him?" The silence that followed was shaped exactly like the answer I already knew. "I see," I said. "I thought he'd grow out of it. I thought if I said something, it would just make him dig in harder. You know how he is when someone pushes back, Mom. He just..." "Diane." I said her name again, the same way, and she heard something in it. "I want to say something to you, and I want you to hear it clearly. I am not angry with you. I understand why you made the choices you made. But when you know that someone is being unkind about another person and you say nothing, you are not staying out of it. You are choosing a side. The choice is just invisible because it looks like doing nothing." I paused. "I want you to think about that, not as a criticism, as information." A long silence. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. "I know," she said. "Come Sunday," I said. "Bring Frank. It'll be a good meal." Mom, are you going to say something to him? I'm going to cook, I said. That's what I'm going to do. She came. She sat next to Frank at the table with the careful attention of someone watching for something she couldn't quite name. When Tyler made his comment and looked at Marco for confirmation, I did not look at Diane. But I heard her, from across the table, draw a very small, very controlled breath. She did not say anything, which was, I thought, an improvement, if a slight one. I hung up and stood for a moment in my kitchen. Then I picked up the knife and went back to the short ribs. My hands were steady. The meat was perfect. I had planned a good meal, and I would cook it, and I would let the evening find its own shape from there. But Diane's call had shifted something in me, not added anger exactly, but clarified what I was dealing with. This was not an embarrassed young man who had said something foolish in private. This was someone who had planned an audience, who had built a joke around my table and invited other people to be in on it. Who had decided before the evening had even begun that I would be the punchline. I put the short ribs in the braising pan and added the mirepoix and watched the kitchen fill with the smell of browning meat and thought, all right, Tyler, let's see how your evening goes. I put the short ribs in the braising pan and added the mirepoix and watched the kitchen fill with the smell of browning meat and thought, all right, Tyler, let's see how your evening goes. I want to say something about what it means to cook a meal when you know what it has to do. I have had this experience before, not often, but in the way of someone who has worked in professional kitchens long enough to encounter the dinners that matter. A meal can be sustenance, and it can be ceremony, and it can be an argument, and it can be, if you are careful and skilled and patient, a kind of proof. The meals that work at that level are not showy. They are precise. Every element is in service of a singular effect, which is not, look how technically accomplished this is, but rather, this is what this ingredient is supposed to taste like, and now you know. A great braise should taste like the platonic idea of braised beef. Not of this particular recipe, not of this particular cook, but of the essential character of the thing itself. When you achieve it, the diner stops thinking about technique and just receives the experience. That is the goal. It is harder than it sounds. I spent Friday and Saturday preparing. But first, there was Friday night, which was its own kind of preparation, though it happened entirely inside me. I did not sleep well on Friday. I had not expected to. There is a particular quality of wakefulness that is not anxiety exactly. Anxiety has a jagged edge, a physical urgency, a sense that something bad might happen that can be prevented. What I experienced Friday night was something quieter and more deliberate, the kind of alertness that comes before something you have decided to walk toward rather than something that is coming for you. I lay in Gerald's half of the bed. I still sleep on my side after 30 years, habit being deeper than grief. And I watched the ceiling in the dark and thought about the morning. I thought about Tyler at my table when he was 8 years old, eating the short rib braise for the first time and looking up at me with an expression of pure, uncomplicated joy, the kind children have before they learn to manage their reactions for an audience. He had said, "Grandma, this is the best thing." Not elaborately, just the best thing, the way children tell the truth. I thought about Patricia Reyes standing at the range in the Aurelius kitchen in 1994, a woman of about 50 then, with hands that were precise as instruments and a voice that never rose above a conversational volume. She had pulled me aside after a service one evening and said, "Marsh, you're holding back." I had said, "Chef?" And she had said, You know more than you're doing. Whatever made you think modest cooking is safer than full cooking, let it go. I had stood in the kitchen after everyone else had left and thought about that for a long time. I had been 39. Tyler was -9. The lesson had taken a long time to learn, and I had eventually learned it. And now I was 71, and there was no more holding back to do. I thought about the recommendation letter I had written. I had been at this desk when I wrote it, on a Tuesday evening in June, with the window open and the smell of the summer garden coming through. Tyler had sat across from me and explained what he needed, a professional reference, someone who could speak to his capability in a kitchen, and I had said yes without hesitation because the capability was real. I had spent 20 minutes drafting 3 paragraphs that were accurate and specific and genuinely positive because he deserved that. I had handed the letter to him, and he had thanked me and left, and that was the last time either of us had mentioned it. He had called 2 weeks later to say he got the job. He had not called it a recommendation letter. He had not mentioned the letter at all. I lay in the dark and turned that over and felt the weight of it, which was not quite anger and not quite sadness. Something more like clarity. The particular clarity that comes at 3 a.m. when you have run out of ways to avoid the true shape of a thing. At 4, I got up. The kitchen was cold and dark, and I stood in it for a moment, not turning on the lights, letting my eyes find the shapes, the knife block, the hanging herbs, the Dutch oven on the back burner where the braise had spent the night. I put the kettle on. I sat at the table with my hands around a cup of tea, and I looked at the notebook on the shelf, and I thought, all right then. By 5, I was working. The short ribs had done exactly what 3 days of work should do, and when I lifted the lid, the steam carried a smell that sat in the chest like a full cord. I skimmed the fat that had set overnight. I tasted the liquid and added a teaspoon of red wine vinegar and a half teaspoon of salt, each addition separate, tasting between them, finding the place where the acidity lifted the depth without competing with it. When it was right, I put the lid back and lowered the heat to a bare minimum. It would hold there until service. Patricia Reyes had taught me that too, the long rest before the final heat. By 7, the kitchen was warm, and I had set up the mise en place for the polenta, the herb salad, the tarte tatin. The apples were peeled and cut. The caramel was ready in the pan. I worked the way I have always worked, in a kitchen I know well, without hurry, without wasted movement, each step following the previous one with the logic of long practice. Gerald used to come down in the mornings when I was cooking and stand in the doorway watching. He said once that watching me work in the kitchen was like watching someone fluent speak a language. He meant without translation, directly. The hands and the mind running the same program. I thought about that Saturday morning and felt him in the room the way you feel people who are gone. Not as a presence exactly, but as a quality of attention, a familiar warmth in a particular corner of a familiar space. I made the polenta base and seasoned it to a place just behind where it would finish, knowing that the braise's sauce would bring it home. I made a herb salad from the garden. Flat leaf parsley, tarragon, chives, a little mint, dressed simply with good olive oil and lemon. I made the tarte tatin on Saturday afternoon. Caramel first, made in a pan I've had since 1986, the same one every time. The apples were from the last of my neighbor Dorothy's tree, which she had given me in October and which I had kept wrapped in a cool corner of the basement. There was one other thing I did on Saturday. I went to the spare room, where Gerald's books are, and found the box I keep on the bottom shelf. Photographs from the hotel, from the restaurants, menus I had saved, a profile piece from a Columbus food magazine in 2001, a certificate from a culinary competition in 1995 in which I placed second in the regional division. I went through it slowly. I am not a nostalgic person, or I try not to be. But I took out the magazine piece. It had a photograph of me at the Hotel Aurelius Range, much younger, in my whites, and I put it on the kitchen shelf next to my recipe notebook. Not prominently, not as a display, just where it might be seen by someone who looked. Sunday arrived cold and clear, the February sky a deep, uncomplicated blue. I was up at 7, as I always am. I fed the birds, I made coffee, I checked the braise. It had rested overnight, and the fat had set on the surface in a clean white layer that I skimmed with a spoon, revealing the dark, jewel-colored liquid underneath. I tasted it and added a little salt and a teaspoon of vinegar, and nothing else. It was where it needed to be. The guests were due at 3. At 2:30, my neighbor Dorothy knocked on the back door with a question about her garden calendar and her goat. Dorothy is 80 years old and keeps what she calls a kitchen garden, which means a vegetable patch of ferocious efficiency, and, since last spring, one Nigerian dwarf goat named Persimmon, who she had acquired for the purpose of eating down the weeds, but who had since developed opinions about the boundaries of her designated grazing area. "She got out again," Dorothy said from the back step. "She's in your garden, Ellie. I'm sorry. I'd go get her, but my knee—" "I'll get her," I said. I went around the side of the house and found Persimmon in my herb garden, eating what appeared to be the lemon verbena with some satisfaction. She looked at me without guilt. She had a small, round, certain face. "No," I said. She blinked slowly, which goats do when they are considering whether to comply, which they generally do not. I took her by the collar and led her back to Dorothy's gate and went back inside to check on the polenta. At 3:15, the doorbell rang. Tyler came in first, wearing what I recognized as his restaurant person clothes. Dark jeans, a very clean shirt, the careful casualness of someone who has put effort into appearing not to have put effort in. Behind him was Marco DeVita, who was taller than I'd expected from photographs, with a serious face and the unhurried movement of someone who is accustomed to running things. And behind Marco was Amanda Park, small and very direct-looking, with the kind of eyes that assess a room in a single pass and file the information without comment. "Grandma," Tyler said and kissed my cheek. He was in good spirits. He smelled faintly of the cologne he had started wearing recently, which was fine. "Tyler," I said, "come in." I shook hands with Marco and Amanda. Marco's handshake was firm and attentive. Amanda's was brief and sufficient. They came into the hallway and I took their coats, and for a moment we stood together in the entrance to the kitchen, where the smell of the braise met them. I watched them. There is a specific thing that happens in the face of a person with a trained palate when they encounter a smell that is significantly more complex than they were expecting. The face doesn't change dramatically. It is a small shift, a slight pause in whatever expression was in process, a moment of reorientation, a very subtle recalibration. Marco did it. Amanda did it. Tyler, who had begun saying something about the drive over, noticed that his colleagues had stopped listening to him and turned to look at them. "What are you cooking?" Marco said. He was looking at me. The words came out before he had consciously decided to say them. The kind of question a person asks when something has bypassed their manners and gone straight to their curiosity. "Beef short rib braise," I said. "Red wine and thyme. It's been going since Thursday." Another moment. "Thursday," he said. "It rests better the longer it goes," I said. 3 days gives you a different depth than 1. He looked at me with an expression I recognized from kitchens, the look of someone recategorizing. "You know a great deal about braising," he said. It was not quite a question. "I've been doing it for a while," I said. Tyler was looking between us with an expression that was not quite comfortable. He had started this conversation, and it had, in the hallway of my house, in the first 90 seconds of his visit, already become something he had not intended. "Come sit down," I said. "Can I offer you anything before we eat? I have wine open, or there's apple cider from the neighbor's pressing in the fall." We sat in the living room and drank the cider, which was excellent, because Dorothy's apples are excellent. And Tyler told a story about something that had happened at the restaurant last week. A difficult table, a complicated order. And Marco and Amanda listened and contributed, and it was, on the surface, a perfectly easy Sunday afternoon visit. I sat and listened and asked the occasional question, not about cooking, but about other things. How the short north was changing, what they thought of the new market on 5th. They were interesting people. Marco was more reserved than I had expected, funnier in a dry way. Amanda spoke precisely, with no wasted words, and had strong opinions about most things she mentioned. At some point during this period, I believe it was when Tyler was refilling his cider, Marco noticed my recipe notebook on the kitchen shelf. He had a clear line of sight from where he was sitting. He looked at it for a moment, the way you look at something that registers as interesting before you know why. And then his gaze moved to the magazine piece beside it, and I saw him read the headline, and I saw his expression change. He looked at me. Is that Hotel Aurelius?" "It is," I said. "You worked there?" 11 years, I said. "Sous chef for the last 7. A beat. "Who was the executive chef when you were there?" He was not testing me. He was asking the way you ask when you already half know the answer and need to hear it confirmed. "James Whitfield for the first 4 years, I said. "And then I was working under Patricia Reyes." Something shifted in Marco's face. "Patricia Reyes trained under Ducasse," he said. "She did," I said. "She was extraordinary, strict, almost punishing. But what she taught me about the relationship between salt and time, I have used every week of my life since." The room was very quiet for a moment. Not an uncomfortable quiet, a realigning quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when a conversation has arrived somewhere important and everyone understands it and needs a moment to arrange themselves around the new information. Tyler was very still. "Tyler," Amanda said in a tone that was completely neutral, "you said your grandmother was a home cook." I watched Tyler's face, the work of it, the recalibration, the decision made in perhaps 3 seconds about what expression to wear. Yeah," he said. "I mean, she retired." "I've eaten at Hotel Aurelius," Marco said. He said it simply, as a fact. He looked at me. "I had a meal there in 2006 that I still think about. We ordered the rabbit, and there was a gremolata on the bass that—" He paused. "That was a professional kitchen." "It was a very good one," I said. Tyler cleared his throat. "I didn't know— I mean, I knew she used to cook professionally, but I didn't—" "Let's eat," I said. We moved to the table at 4 o'clock. My dining table seats 6 comfortably, and the 4 of us occupied it without crowding, which always makes a meal feel more deliberate, more like something chosen. I had said it plainly: good cloth, the white plates from the cabinet, glasses that were not precious but were the right shape. Gerald had taught me that lesson. The right shaped glass is worth more than an expensive one. I served the herb salad first. It came to the table in a wide bowl, dressed simply, the parsley and tarragon and chives bright and fresh smelling, the lemon in the dressing cutting through the room. Tyler looked at it. "It's a salad," he said, to nobody in particular. Amanda had already taken some. She ate a bite and paused. "What's in the dressing?" she asked. "Lemon and a good olive oil," I said. "The tarragon is from the garden." "Grown in February?" Marco said. "I keep some in pots in the kitchen window through the winter," I said. "It goes woody eventually, but the flavor holds through January." He nodded, tasting. Tyler was eating without comment. The braise came next. I brought it to the table in the Dutch oven, which I always do. There is something in the presentation of a braise in its own pot, the lid lifted at the table, the steam and the smell arriving all at once, that no plated service can replicate. The moment I set it down and removed the lid, the room changed. Not dramatically, just the air changed quality. 3 days of cooking concentrated in that moment. Marco sat slightly forward. Amanda set down her fork. Tyler looked at the pot and then at his colleagues. He was smiling. A small, proprietary smile. He was about to say something. "It's braised short rib," he announced, as if introducing something. "Grandma's specialty. Very homey." He said the word homey the way he'd learned to say it, with a slight upward lilt, the word wrapped in invisible quotation marks, meaning simple, meaning basic, meaning the good-natured effort of someone who doesn't know better. I served without commenting. The braise over the polenta, the sauce pooled correctly. I served Marco first, then Amanda, then Tyler, then myself. Tyler picked up his fork and looked at the plate. Something flickered across his face. The smell had reached him. There was no avoiding it. But he was committed now, performing for an audience, and he made a decision. He cut a piece of the short rib. He ate it. He put his fork down. "It's fine," he said. It's good, Grandma, but it's kind of..." He gestured at the plate in a way that was meant to be diplomatic and wasn't. "You know, it's a bit much. Very rich, very heavy, like it's comfort food. Real cooking is more..." He paused, searching. "It's more refined. It's more about restraint, about technique. This is more like..." He glanced at Marco, seeking support, a slight smile anticipating agreement. "You know what I mean. It's home cooking. It's not what you do in a professional kitchen." The table was very quiet. Not the quiet of agreement, not the quiet of discomfort exactly. The quiet of two people with trained palates who were attending to something else entirely and had temporarily stopped tracking the conversation. Marco was still eating. He took a second bite, then a third. He was doing what a serious cook does when they encounter something that requires attention. He was shutting out everything else and listening to the food. Amanda had not said anything. She was eating steadily. Her expression was the expression of someone who has suspended judgment while they gather evidence. Tyler looked between them. The smile was still on his face, but it had gone slightly uncertain at the edges. "Don't you think?" he said, to Marco specifically. Marco finished his bite. He looked at his plate. He looked at me. Then he looked at Tyler with an expression that was entirely neutral and said quietly, "No." Tyler blinked. "What?" "I don't think that," Marco said. "I think this braise is technically accomplished. I think the collagen reduction in this sauce is correct in a way that takes significant experience to achieve. I think whoever made this knows what they are doing." He picked up his fork. "I'd like to eat it, if you don't mind." Tyler's smile collapsed. He looked at his plate. He looked at me. I was cutting my short rib with the attention one gives to a thing worth attending to, and I did not look up. "I'm just saying it's not restaurant quality," Tyler said. He said it the way people say things when they have already lost the argument but cannot stop talking. Amanda looked at him for a moment. "Tyler," she said, "stop." He stopped. The table returned to the business of eating. I poured the wine I had opened, a Barolo, 2011, from a case Gerald and I had bought years ago and never finished. It had reached exactly the right place. Marco noticed the bottle. He looked at the year. "Good choice," he said. "It needed another few years," I said. "I'm glad I waited." He raised his glass very slightly, the way one professional acknowledges another, and returned to his plate. Tyler ate his entire serving in silence. What happened in the first 60 seconds of eating was the thing I had been working toward, though I had not articulated it in exactly those terms until that moment. Marco ate a bite of the braise with the polenta. He chewed slowly. He set his fork down and looked at the plate and then at me. He did not say anything for a moment. "Ellie," he said, "this sauce, how are you finishing it?" "Nothing unusual," I said. "A little butter at the end, good vinegar at the beginning." "The collagen reduction," he said. "It's—" He searched for the word. "Correct," I said, because that was the word. Not impressive, not unusual. Correct. When a braise is done properly, the sauce has an integrity that comes from the protein itself, not from thickeners or shortcuts, and it coats the palate in a way that is specific and irreplaceable. Marco knew this. He was a professional. He ate 3 more bites in silence, which is the highest compliment. Amanda ate steadily and then said, "This polenta, there's something in the finish." "Bay leaf infused into the milk," I said, "and I toast the cornmeal first." She looked at me. She had the expression of someone solving a problem she had been halfway through. "Bay in polenta," she said. "I've never thought to do that." "Patricia Reyes showed me," I said, "in a kitchen in 1994. Tyler had not said much. He was eating, and he was eating well. That, at least, I noticed. He knew what he was eating. Whatever he might say about my cooking in front of Cassidy or on a phone call to a colleague, he was not immune to it. He never had been. As a child, he had eaten at my table with a wholehearted unself-consciousness that he had buried somewhere in the last 2 years of attempting to be a professional. It was near the end of the main course, when the plates were nearly clean and the conversation had moved through several subjects and come back to food. It usually does, with people who cook for a living, that Marco said something I had not anticipated. "I've been trying to source a particular braising technique for a new dish I'm working on," he said. He was looking at his plate. "Something that gives the sauce the body this has, but without using a reduction. I want to preserve more of the wine character." He looked at me. "Would you be willing to walk me through what you did? Not as a recipe, as a process." I considered him for a moment. "I would," I said. "I'd like that," he said. Tyler had gone very quiet. It was after dessert, the tarte tatin, which Marco ate most of and Amanda had 2 servings of, and which Tyler ate with a focused attention that told me he was using the task of eating to manage the task of thinking. That the conversation turned, as I had known it would eventually turn, to the more direct matter. We were back in the sitting room with coffee and Persimmon the goat, who had apparently broken out again and who had managed to get to the back door, was visible through the kitchen window, her round face pressed against the glass with an expression of inquiry. Amanda saw her first. "Is that," she said, "is there a goat at your door?" "Dorothy's goat," I said. "She has boundary issues." At this point, Persimmon, apparently having concluded that indoor heating was preferable to the February garden, put her nose against the door handle. This is something goats can do. The door swung open. She walked in. She walked in with the complete, purposeful confidence of an animal who has decided a space is available, went directly to Tyler's jacket, which he had draped over a kitchen chair, and began eating the lapel. The room went entirely silent for 2 seconds. "She's critiquing your fashion choices," I said, without turning from the coffee I was pouring. "Frankly, I agree with her." Amanda made a sound I believe was a laugh, suppressed into something more controlled, but not entirely successfully. Marco pressed his fingers to his mouth. Tyler stood up and removed the jacket from Persimmon's mouth with the expression of a person who has lost complete control of the narrative of the evening and knows it. I took Persimmon by the collar and escorted her back out the door. Dorothy's fence had apparently been conquered twice. I made a note to call about the latch. When I came back in, Tyler was standing by the kitchen window looking at the garden, and Marco and Amanda were still at the table. "Tyler," Marco said. His voice was conversational, even. "You know, I hired you in part because of a reference letter from your grandmother." Tyler turned from the window. "I have the letter on file," Marco said. "It was a good letter, very specific about what you do well, very honest about where you need to develop." He looked at his coffee cup and then at Tyler. "I read it before your first day, and I thought, whoever wrote this knows kitchens. That language is professional language." He paused. "I should have asked you about it then." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a car passed on the street. "I didn't know she," Tyler said, and stopped. He tried again. "I didn't realize she had that kind of background." "Did you ask?" Amanda said. It was not unkind. It was direct, which is different. Tyler looked at me. Something in his face that was not quite the adult version of him, but not quite the child version either. Something in between, uncertain, stripped of the performing. "Did you write that letter?" "I did," I said. "Why didn't you tell me?" "You didn't ask," I said. Same words as Amanda, but mine had more behind them. "You asked me to write a letter, and I wrote it. You've eaten at my table your entire life, and you've never asked. It goes both ways, Tyler." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from the earlier ones. This one had weight. "I said some things," Tyler said. He said it to his hands, which were flat on the table. "About your cooking, I said them in front of people, and they weren't." He looked up. His face was embarrassed and young and a little raw. "They weren't true." "No," I said, "they weren't. I don't know what I was trying to do." "You were trying to look bigger by making me smaller," I said. I said it without heat, which meant it landed more cleanly than it would have otherwise. I understand why young people do that. I did things like it myself when I was your age, though I try not to remember them too clearly. The question isn't whether you did it. The question is what you understand now that you didn't then. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You should have told me." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe you should have been interested enough to ask." I poured a second coffee and set it in front of him. Either way, we know now. It was not a resolution. It was a beginning of one, which is a different thing and in some ways more honest. I am not a person who believes in the clean arc. The apology offered, accepted, everything healed. Real things take longer and are less symmetrical. But that moment in my kitchen, with the smell of the braise still faint in the air, and Marco DeVita's empty plate in the dish rack, and a goat somewhere in Dorothy's yard reconsidering her options, was the hinge point. I knew it then. Tyler knew it. Marco and Amanda, who had the good grace to look at their coffees during the most personal part of the exchange, knew it too. Marco left his card on the counter. "When you want to talk about the braise," he said, "any time. I mean it." Amanda shook my hand at the door. Her grip was the same as when she'd arrived. Brief, sufficient. Thank you for dinner, she said. That meal was... She seemed to consider the word. It was correct, she said, and I recognized the choice and appreciated it. Tyler was last. He stood in the doorway with his jacket. Persimmon had taken a clean half-inch off the left lapel, and he looked at me for a moment with an expression I didn't have a name for yet. Sunday after next, he said, if you want. I'll be here, I said. I'm always here. He drove away first. Marco and Amanda followed a few minutes later. I stood in the doorway until their taillights turned the corner, and then I went back inside to the kitchen, which was warm and smelled of the meal and of the coffee, and faintly, very faintly, of the herb garden through the back window, dormant now, but present. I put the kettle on. I stood at the window and looked at the February garden. Nothing growing yet, but the garlic was in from October, sleeping underground, working. There is a particular kind of patience in growing things. You put them in the ground, and you trust the process, and you wait. And the thing comes up when it's ready, not before. 3 days later, Viv called. Well, she said, by which she meant, report. In 30 years of friendship, Viv has never needed more than one word to open a conversation she's been waiting for. It went, I said, the way it was going to go. He was an ass. He was young and frightened and trying to be something, I said, which can look like being an ass, especially from the outside. That's generous. I'm allowed to be generous, I said. It's my kitchen. And the chef, Marco, what's his name? DeVita, I said. He was exactly what his reputation suggested. Serious. Honest. He ate 3 days of work in 20 minutes and understood every bit of it. Good man, Viv said. What about the goat? She ate his jacket. A pause. She ate his jacket. The left lapel, I said, clean through. Viv's laugh was the laugh of a woman who has seen everything and finds specific things still newly funny. It went on for a while. I waited. Outside my kitchen window, the February afternoon was going gray, and the bare branches of the neighbor's oak were very precise against the sky. And I thought, this is a good moment. Right here, the phone warm in my hand and Viv laughing at the other end about a goat and a jacket and what it means when the universe cooperates. Ellie, she said when she'd recovered, you couldn't have planned the goat. No, I said, the goat was Providence. Providence, she said. I like that. Very restrained. Most people would have said karma. Karma is for people who need a mechanism, I said. Providence just happens. She was quiet a beat, the way she gets when something lands right. You know what the difference is between you and him? You know what you have. He's still figuring out what he has. That's not a comfortable place to be. No, I said. I remember. But you got out of it, she said. Eventually, I said. It takes longer for some people. He's lucky he has someone to get there too, Viv said. I didn't have a better answer than silence for that, which is sometimes the truest response. We stayed on the phone for another 40 minutes. She told me about a problem with her furnace that had escalated into a philosophical disagreement with the repairman about the nature of guarantees. And I told her about the tarte tatin and Dorothy's apples. And by the time we hung up, the afternoon had gone fully dark, and I felt, as I often feel after talking to Viv, that the world had been set in order at the molecular level. The soup club met the following week, on a Thursday, at my house. Viv and Nora and Rosa arrived at their usual times. Viv precisely on time because she is a former nurse and cannot help it. Nora 5 minutes early because she cannot help that either. Rosa 12 minutes late because she always believes the drive will take 8 minutes and it never does. I made 2 soups. The classical soup was a French onion made the long way, with onions that had been caramelizing since 7 in the morning and a stock I'd reduced from the braised bones. The experimental soup was something I'd been thinking about for weeks. A Japanese-inspired short rib broth, clear as glass, with a garnish of shaved radish and the last of the preserved herbs from the fall. It was not a recipe from anyone. It was what I had after 3 days of thinking about the meal and Marco's comments and the flavor I wanted to carry forward. Rosa tasted it and said nothing for a long moment, which for Rosa is equivalent to a standing ovation. "What is that?" she said. It was not a question. "Something new," I said. Nora tasted it, set her spoon down, tasted again. "There's something in the broth. It's not soy." "Miso," I said, "just a little, and the short rib collagen. Same principle as the braise, but cleared." Viv tasted it and said, "Jesus, Ellie!" "Good Jesus or concerned Jesus?" I said. "There is no concerned Jesus for soup like this," Viv said. "This is the other kind." "Can I have the recipe?" Rosa asked. "My daughter has been asking me to teach her something, and this," she gestured at the bowl in the specific way she gestures when words are insufficient. "Come over Tuesday," I said. "We'll make it together." "She is going to lose her mind," Rosa said. We ate and talked and laughed about things I am not going to write down here because some of what happens at the soup club belongs only to the soup club. Rosa told a story about her neighbor that required 3 digressions and was worth every one of them. Nora read us a letter she had gotten from her daughter, which was funny in the way that children who have grown up and become people are funny. Unexpectedly, specifically, full of details you didn't know to look for when they were small. Viv complained about the new speed bump on her street in language that I will not reproduce, but that accurately expressed the engineering failure in question. And Nora, who has the driest delivery of anyone I have ever known, said, "Perhaps you could submit your remarks to the city council. I believe they have a complaints process specifically for people who feel strongly about asphalt." Viv threw a dish towel at her. Nora caught it without looking up from her soup. Tyler called on Wednesday. We talked for 40 minutes, which is longer than we had talked since he was in high school. "Can I ask you something?" he said, about 10 minutes in. "Yes," I said. "How long have you known? I mean, that you were good, that you were actually good, professionally?" I thought about that for a moment. "A long time," I said. "But knowing and being willing to act on the knowing are different things. I was cautious for years. Patricia Reyes told me once that I was holding back, and I didn't fully believe her until I was nearly 40. I paused. "You have more time than that." "I've been a real ass," he said. "Yes," I said, "you have." A silence. Then carefully, Did it hurt, what I said?" I thought about that question for a moment with the seriousness it deserved. "Not the way you might think," I said. "What you said about my cooking wasn't true, and I knew it wasn't true, so the words themselves didn't land. What hurt was simpler. You were unkind, and you were unkind to me in front of people, which meant you had decided it was safe to be unkind to me. That's the part that cost something." He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said. He said it simply, without adornment, which was the right way to say it. "I know," I said. "Ask me about the notebook." "Can I see it?" he said. "You can," I said. I'm not trying to take anything," he said quickly. "I just want to—" "Tyler," I said. "I know." And I did. He came the following Sunday. He was on time. He brought good wine, which was a choice that told me something. He sat at my kitchen table the way he used to sit when he was 12 years old, with his elbows on the table and his full attention, and I opened the notebook to the first page. March 14th, 1978. Hotel Aurelius, Columbus. I showed him line by line, the mise en place notations, the timing notes, the margin comments where Patricia Reyes had corrected something with a single precise word, or where I had written myself a reminder that had lasted 40 years. He turned the pages slowly. "This is more organized than anything we have at the restaurant," he said. "Professional habit," I said. "This is," he looked at a page, "this is the rabbit, the Hotel Aurelius rabbit. Marco said he remembered this." "He ate it in 2006, I said. "I was gone by then, but the recipe stayed." He looked at the page for a long time. Then he closed the notebook carefully and looked at me. The expression on his face was not one I can summarize in a single word. It had several things in it, the way a braise has several things in it, and the overall effect was something like the truth of a person who has stopped performing. "I'm sorry," he said. "I said things I should not have said. I said them to people who have now heard them and will not forget them. I can't undo that, but I'm sorry." "I know," I said. "Is there a way He stopped, tried again. "Is there anything I can do?" I looked at my kitchen, the knives, the herbs at the window just beginning to show the first green of early spring, the notebook under his hands. I thought about Patricia Reyes and the kitchen in 1994. I thought about Gerald in the doorway watching my hands. I looked at my grandson across the table, 26 years old, his elbows on the wood the way they'd been when he was 12. "You can learn something," I said. "That's what you can do." He nodded. He looked like he meant it. Marco DeVita called me that same week. He asked, with a directness I appreciated, if I would be willing to come to the restaurant one morning before service and walk him through the braise. Not to consult, not professionally, just, he wanted to understand the process from someone who had been doing it long enough to know what the long time does to it. I said yes. I brought the notebook. Osteria Selene is a beautiful kitchen, serious, well-organized, with the particular kind of order that comes from a head chef who has thought about flow and function and demands that standards be maintained even when nobody is watching. I walked in on a Thursday morning at 7, and Marco was already there, in his whites, with 2 line cooks setting up the stations, and the kitchen smelled of the stock that had been running since the night before and of citrus from the prep already underway. Tyler was not scheduled until 10. I had noted this. I suspected Marco had arranged it that way, and I appreciated the consideration. We spent 3 hours. I stood at his range and walked him through the process, the browning, the mirepoix, the wine, the proportion, the time. He asked questions that were good questions, the kind that come from someone who already knows a great deal and is trying to fill specific gaps. He asked about the collagen and what temperature maintains the reduction without breaking it. He asked about the resting time and what the overnight refrigeration accomplishes that a shorter rest does not. He asked about the vinegar and at what point and why. And I explained about Patricia Reyes and the lesson about acid. And he listened with the focused, absorptive attention of someone who will use the information. At the end, he asked if he could photograph several pages of the notebook, open to specific entries. I said yes. As I was putting on my coat, he said, "Tyler mentioned that he seemed to search for the right word, and then, not finding the right one, used the honest one. He mentioned that he'd been unkind." "He has," I said. "He's a good cook," Marco said. "He's better than he knows, which is part of the problem." A pause. "I've watched him with the other line cooks. He performs there, too. He's working from the idea of what a good cook looks like, rather than just being one. When he stops performing, he's faster, more instinctive." He looked at his notebook. "I think what happened Sunday might have helped with that." I think so too, I said. Marco looked at me. Whatever you cooked in that kitchen, that's not a home cook. Real chefs know exactly how this tastes. That's why they're here, and he wasn't ready. I know, I said, and I did. I had always known it. The knowing is not the issue. The issue is whether the knowledge sits in your hands or only in your head. And mine has been in my hands for 43 years. The braise shows it. The notebook shows it. The herb garden shows it. And frankly, so does the fact that Persimmon the goat chose Tyler's jacket over anything else in my house, which suggests that even goats have some discrimination about quality. Come back, Marco said. Anytime. The kitchen is open to you. I drove home through the short north in the gray February morning, and the streets were quiet. The bare trees were just beginning to show the first suggestion of what was coming, small and definite against the sky. And I thought, yes, the kitchen is always open. It has been open for 43 years. It will be open tomorrow. It is May now. The herb garden is full and fragrant, and the garlic has come up beautifully, fat and purposeful, the way garlic does when it has been given a cold winter to grow through. The tarragon is back, the chives, the flat-leaf parsley, the lemon verbena, which Persimmon tried to eat in February and which has recovered with the indignant vigor of a plant that refuses to be diminished. Dorothy fixed the latch on the gate. Persimmon has not escaped since, though Dorothy says she watches it in a way that suggests she is still thinking about it. The soup club met last week at Rosa's. She made a gazpacho from her mother's recipe and a pozole that had been going since the night before and filled her house with a smell that met us on the porch. Rosa's daughter Maya stopped by briefly and tasted the clear short rib broth I had brought as a teaching piece, and stood very still for a moment and said, "What is in this?" Rosa beamed. "Ask your cooking teacher," she said, and pointed at me. Maya looked at me with the expression of a young person who has just correctly seen someone they had underestimated, and I recognized it. It pleased me. It always does. Viv has decided to learn to make bread. She describes it as a purely scientific exercise and is approaching it with the systematic ferocity she brought to 30 years of nursing. She texts me photographs of her loaves, which have improved dramatically. The early ones were dense and earnest, like textbooks made of flour. The most recent ones have a crust and a crumb that suggest she has found something. "I refuse to be defeated by wheat," she told me on the phone. I told her the wheat was not the adversary. She told me to stop being philosophical. We agreed to disagree, which is the foundation of our friendship. Nora is planning her Budapest trip for October. She has written down the hot paprika I asked for in 3 different places, which is how Nora ensures things happen. Tyler comes most Sundays now. He sits at my table and asks questions, and I answer them, and sometimes I show him something, and sometimes he shows me something, because he has skills I don't have, and there is no point in pretending otherwise. He is better with pastry than I am. I have never had the patience for precise measurement, and pastry requires it. His knife work has become genuinely excellent. The speed and confidence of it now is the speed of someone who has internalized a movement. He is, when he is not performing for anyone, quite good company. Direct, curious, funny in a dry way I had not noticed before because he had been using up most of his personality on impression management. Last Sunday, he brought me a jar of preserved lemon he had made himself, following a technique from my notebook. He set it on the table without ceremony. I don't know if I got the salt right, he said. I opened the jar and tasted. The salt was correct. The lemon was bright and clean and preserved with the care of someone who had paid attention to the process. The salt is right, I said. He sat up slightly, the way people do when something has been confirmed, and picked up his coffee. He did not say anything. He didn't need to. The jar was on the table between us, and we both knew what it was. Evidence. Not of what he was trying to be, of what he was actually becoming. He has not said anything like what he said before. I believe him when he says he won't. I found a photograph last week in Gerald's spare room from the Aurelius kitchen, 1991. I am standing at the range in my whites next to James Whitfield, who is looking at something off camera. I am looking at what is in the pan. My expression is focused and certain and entirely at ease. It is the expression of someone who knows exactly where she is and what she is capable of. I am 46 years old in that photograph, which seems both very long ago and not long at all. The hands look the same. I put it in a frame and set it on the kitchen shelf next to the notebook. Not for Tyler, not for Marco, not for anyone who might visit and see it and feel prompted to ask. For me. For the 71-year-old woman who gets up every morning and makes coffee and tends the garden and opens the notebook and knows, without needing to explain it to anyone, without needing it acknowledged, without requiring a Sunday dinner to prove it, what she has in her hands. The photograph is a reminder of the same thing the notebook is a reminder of, which is the same thing the herb garden is a reminder of, and the braise, and the tarte tatin, and the jar of preserved lemons sitting on the corner of my kitchen table. That what you have built over a lifetime does not become less true because someone young and frightened looked at it and failed to recognize it. The value was never in the recognition. That photograph looked right there next to those pages, next to 43 years of work written down in ink by hands that knew exactly what they were doing. I stood in my kitchen for a long time. The May morning was warm. Outside, the garden was showing everything it had: the garlic, the tarragon, the lemon verbena, back and indignant and magnificent. The coffee was getting cold. I didn't hurry. I never have.